the horrible case of Elliot Roger. Elliot Roger was born on July 24, 1991, in London, England. His parents were Peter Roger and Jane Roger, both very young at the time of conceiving the child and while growing their professional careers. Peter was dedicated to photography but dreamed of becoming a renowned filmmaker in Hollywood. Jane was a young woman from Malaysia who had come to the United Kingdom to work as a nurse on film sets. Thanks to her job, she had the necessary contacts to fantasize about the idea of moving the family to the United States, where big dreams come true. George Lucas, no less, was a close friend of Jane. In the years following Elliot's birth, the family prepared for the big move, and after the arrival of their fourth member, Georgia, in 1996, they finally embarked on the journey that changed their lives. That year, the four of them took their belongings and settled in California, close to movie stars and huge recording studios. A new chapter in the life of the Rogers began. However, not everyone was pleased with this change. For the first time, sadness appeared within Elliot. For him, the happy days had been left behind in London. But after a brief period of adaptation, he was ready to become the happy child he once was. When it was time to start at his new school, his limited social skills became evident. Elliot was extremely shy and rarely had the courage to approach other children, to start a conversation, or join a game. In these situations, it was his mother who intervened and invited some classmates over to play at the house. Then everything would go normally, and Elliot seemed to integrate easily. Although there were numerous moves, after a while, the Rogers found their place and began to form bonds in the country they had arrived in. The adults had their friends, their dream jobs. Elliot was doing well in school. Everything seemed to be going as planned. But the dream was short-lived. By the time Elliot turned 7, the fights between Peter and Jane became more frequent. The situation became unbearable, and after a few months, the couple decided to separate. This event significantly affected Elliot's emotions and behavior. The child began to feel resentment towards his father, especially when, shortly after, he introduced him to his new girlfriend. He couldn't believe what he was doing to his mother. He refused to go to his father's house because he was hardly ever there, and he had to spend time with his father's new girlfriend, whom Elliot felt was trying to impose rules as if she had authority over him. But other, more important issues were on his mind, and soon his parents' separation became a secondary concern. What really obsessed him was figuring out how to make friends and be seen as a popular kid. He observed from a distance the behavior of the classmates he admired, wanting to emulate their appearance so others would notice him. Until that point, he had felt invisible everywhere except at home. At home, his mother indulged all his wishes and whims, but outside, he felt that no one acknowledged his existence. He did everything within his power to change this, seeing that his father, a good and successful man, had quickly found a new woman. Elliot concluded that this was the way to stand out among people and eventually become a great seducer. He asked his parents for permission to dye his hair blonde, changed his outfits to urban clothes like those worn by skaters, bought a skateboard, and started practicing. His plans seemed to be working. For the first time, he felt he could find a group of friends on his own without the need to talk too much. But at the same time, he was not so good with physical skills. There was always someone better than him. This discovery filled him with hatred. This was the first time he began to experience envy and jealousy. Others seemed to fit perfectly into the world, but for him, it seemed an impossible task to accomplish. Unfortunately, this thought began to completely take over his mind, plunging him into a vicious cycle of resentment. By the time he reached adolescence, his obsession took another turn. The idea of getting a girlfriend and losing his virginity began to occupy his head all day. He knew that day would come. Each day, his group of friends demanded he do something he didn't want to do. He himself claimed that he was desperate to catch the attention of women, to receive the love that had been denied to him so far, to lose the virginity that made him look like a loser. Time kept passing, and he was still unable to achieve his goal. He couldn't understand why women didn't notice him, why they didn't choose him and preferred to go out with unoriginal boys, only dating good-looking guys whom he considered stereotypes. After constant frustrations, which accumulated from failed attempts to relate to other people, He immersed himself in the world of video games. There he found an escape from the harsh reality he faced daily. He distanced himself from the few friends he had managed to make with the help of his mother and fully delved into the parallel universe of role-playing games, losing interest in everything else. At school, they began to bully him for being the quiet and calm boy and also mocked him for his fear of talking to women. When the situation became unbearable, his parents decided to change his school. However, this measure turned out to be even worse, as he was sent to a school with a larger number of students than the previous one, which caused him overwhelming anxiety. At that establishment, he also suffered bullying from his classmates. He then begged his parents not to send him back to that place. Complying with his request, they decided to send him to a smaller part-time institution. Elliot felt more comfortable there, but still none of his classmates were to his liking. The hatred for people was already entrenched in him. He saw himself as superior to others who were incapable of noticing him. For this reason, he believed he was doomed to a lonely and miserable life, while other boys his age lived their lives fully, partying, having intimate relationships, and socializing with friends. The envy and jealousy he had begun to feel during his childhood took over his body, filling him with fury and hatred towards all humanity. These thoughts led to several episodes of crying where he expressed being fed up with his life. The experiences that had led him to constant frustration and the new family his father had formed eventually plunged him into a deep depression. Although he refused to leave his room, his parents decided to take him to a psychiatrist. The professional prescribed medication, but Elliot refused to take it, insisting he was not sick. Nevertheless, the first signs that something was not right began to appear. When it was time to go to university, his parents thought it would be a good idea for Elliot to live on the campus of the University of California. Perhaps being away from his family, the boy would find a way to relate to people his age without the intervention of his mother or any other adult. However, once again, the plan did not turn out as expected. Now, he lived with other classmates, but he didn't even engage in conversation with them. He found it impossible to share his space with others. Everything seemed to be an attack on him. Moreover, reality hit him hard again. The city where he lived was full of young people having fun day and night, walking hand in hand with their partners, and he couldn't even approach anyone. He then thought that, although he hated them, the only option to get a girlfriend was to become like one of them. He took advantage of his parents' good economic position to build a personality based on wearing designer clothes, driving a high-end car, and flaunting the money he had to be seen as a sophisticated, cultured, and fascinating man. To do that, he had to become rich, and the easiest way to do it was by betting on lottery tickets. He invested the money his parents sent him, learned gaming strategies, and dedicated his time to achieving his goal. But once again, his plan did not come to fruition. It was impossible for him to contain the rage he felt seeing others have the life he desired and believed he deserved. He then began to frequent websites to learn how to seduce women. By clicking on some alternative links, he arrived at a portal where hundreds of men in the same situation shared their frustration and blamed women for their discomfort. However, he saw these men as losers and did not feel he belonged to that category either. His insistence on fulfilling his wish seemed to have no end. On one occasion, learning about a party organized at one of the fraternities, he took the courage to go, even though he had not been invited. Beforehand, he drank vodka in his university room and then went to the place. When he entered the house, he saw people talking among themselves. But once again, they did not notice his presence. He drank a few more glasses there, hoping someone would approach him. Then he noticed an Asian boy having fun, and anger overwhelmed him. He ran towards him and started shouting and insulting him. How was it possible that this Asian boy had friends, and he did not? People mocked him because he was drunk and did not know what he was saying. Then, by his own will, he left that room, went to a balcony, sat down, and watched everyone in solitude, hating them with all his might. Soon the refuge he had found began to fill with boys and girls. Fury returned, and he started to insult the women, trying to push them off the balcony. However, the boys accompanying them reacted in time, and it was he himself who ended up falling. Injured from the fall, he left the place completely lost in his fury. The next day, he called his father to accompany him to a hospital due to the poor condition of his leg. He invented a story in which he was the victim. This was his breaking point. All the discomfort he had been dragging for years had to be returned to the world and humanity, which had rejected him time and again. He decided he had to take control of the situation. The only way out was revenge. This was how his Machiavellian fantasy took shape and turned into a plan to execute. A plan he called the Day of Retribution. Elliot had prepared for months for the day he would finally end his miserable existence. During his time at the university, he had managed to save the money his parents sent him for living expenses to buy weapons that would help him carry out his revenge against humanity. He learned to use them, set a date for the event, and opened a YouTube channel where, days before the attack, he uploaded videos detailing what he intended to do. He made sure to narrate his day-to-day life and the hatred he felt when he saw couples holding hands or kissing in front of him. He claimed it was a crime that some had that opportunity when he wasn't even looked at. It was an injustice perpetrated by a twisted world and humanity. In the videos, he also showed how he drove around in his luxurious car, and at every corner, he found a party of young people having fun, many girls interacting with boys, and how he insulted and resented them. In his original plan, he included the murder of his stepmother and his younger brother for stealing the life he deserved. The date for this terrible event was initially April 26, 2014, as his father would be out of town. However, a change in Peter's schedule forced Elliot to postpone it for another month. Meanwhile, one of the threatening videos Elliot had uploaded to his blog reached his mother. Concerned about what she had just seen, she alerted the police authorities. 2 officers showed up at the door of the apartment where Elliot lived. The young manipulator appeared calm and friendly enough to convince them that he was fine and would not harm himself or anyone else, considering the possibility of ruining everything he had planned up to that point. Elliot decided to expedite his plan on May 23, 2014. He uploaded his last video, titled The Day of Retribution, and simultaneously sent an email to a dozen acquaintances, including his parents, with a 141-page autobiographical manuscript entitled My Twisted World. In it, he explained the reasons for his hatred towards humanity and justified the horrible actions he was about to commit. His targets were women who chose other men and those men who had the fortune of living the life he believed he deserved. Even in his apartment, he stabbed to death 2 of his roommates and a friend who was visiting them while they were sleeping. He then got into his car and drove to a fraternity where, according to him, the most beautiful women who had rejected him throughout his life were located. He knocked persistently on the door, but no one opened. He then fired his weapon at a group of girls passing by. 3 of them died instantly, while 1 was injured but survived. Elliot got back into his car and drove through the streets of the city, bringing terror to each person unfortunate enough to cross his path. Passing by a store, he fired his gun numerous times from his car without getting out. Suddenly, the police managed to locate the loose murderer they had been searching for minutes. They began to pursue him, exchanging gunfire. Elliot, out of control, ran over people in his attempt to escape until he was shot in the hip, causing him to crash into a light post. Then, in the immense silence that finally enveloped the terrified city, a final explosion was heard coming from the interior of the vehicle Elliot was driving. When the officers approached, they found him dead with a head wound. In total, 7 people perished that fateful night, including Elliot Roger. After the desperation and fear that ran through the blood of the witnesses of the tragic event came desolation. No one could believe what had happened on May 23, 2014. The families of the victims were inconsolable at the fatal end of their loved ones. Even his parents could not comprehend the terrible, drastic decision their son had made. Peter Roger felt the need to publicly apologize to the relatives and also assured that they had not been able to see how sick Elliot was, as he had been clever enough to hide most of the thoughts tormenting his mind. Although they were aware of his obsession with getting a girlfriend, he had never expressed the hatred he felt for all humanity. Peter assured that he would live tormented for the rest of his days, knowing that his son took the lives of innocent people due to severe disorders that had not been detected in time. In this account, Roger recounted that as soon as his ex-wife received the email containing the manuscript, she called him desperately to warn him that something bad was about to happen. They believed Elliot was going to take his own life. They then drove to meet him and convince him not to do anything rash. But by the time they arrived at the place, the attack had already started. And the news from the police was the death of their son and 6 other people. In an attempt to remedy what Elliot caused, Elliot's parents dedicated their days to joining the fight for improvements in the health system and against gun possession. The case of Elliot Roger demonstrated that once again, an entire system failed to protect people's integrity. When officers arrived at his apartment, they discovered his collection of knives and other sharp objects, as well as his writings and books about mass murderers. Mental health professionals were also unable to recognize that they were dealing with a severe narcissist, an antisocial person lacking empathy, who endangered his life and others. But they managed to deduce it after his act of revenge. What is even more striking is that while for some, Elliot Roger was a heartless murderer, for others, he represented someone who did justice for people who feel invisible. In the early hours of July 7, 1985, 54-year-old Jane Hilton was found beaten and stabbed to death. She was discovered in a bedroom at her employer's house, a house she had moved into only the previous day, seeking refuge from a troubled marriage. Jane was discovered by 2 fellow housemates and her own daughter, Autumn. The murder made no sense, and the case dragged on for 14 years until 2 new detectives reopened the cold case in 1999. A misquote in an article led investigators to point the finger at Ricky Davis. Davis was eventually tried for the crime and convicted, all the while proclaiming his innocence. Determined not to give up, he sought help from the same justice system that had put him behind bars. 15 years later, Davis was exonerated, and the real killer was found thanks to genetic genealogy testing and the determination of a group called the Innocence Project, who were determined to find the truth. Jane was a familiar face around El Dorado Hills, California. She was a columnist for Foothill Times. She often covered social events in and around town for the paper. Jane had 6 children whom she loved and often wrote poetry to help inspire them daily. She'd been working toward getting her real estate license and was married to Archie Hilton in 1984. However, by July 1985, their marriage started to fall apart. It was then she asked her employer, Wilma Klein, for assistance. Klein owned a fairly large home in El Dorado Hills. With her lived her daughter, Maureen Klein, and her boyfriend. Wilma's grandson, Ricky Davis, and his girlfriend, Connie Dahl, also occupied a room at the house. On July 6, 1985, Wilma welcomed Jane and her youngest daughter, 13-year-old Autumn Anchor, into her home. By all accounts, it was a full house. The first night of her new life would prove to be the night her life ended. At 3:30 a.m., Ricky Davis, then 20, and his girlfriend, 19-year-old Connie Dahl, returned from a party to find Autumn lingering about outside. She told them she was locked out and afraid her mother was going to be angry. All 3 made their way into the house. There was blood in the hallway. It was silent as they reached the first room, belonging to Maureen, Ricky's mother. On the bed was the bloody body of Jane Hilton. She was not breathing. Maureen and her boyfriend had gone on a camping trip and were not home at the time. Ricky and Connie called 911. Paramedics and police arrived, but Jane was pronounced dead at the scene. She had suffered 29 stab wounds, was beaten, and bitten on her shoulder. It was a senseless murder, and investigators began to interview those closest to Jane. Archie Hilton, Jane's estranged husband, was interviewed and provided detectives with a solid alibi and DNA. Archie had been the logical choice, as he and Jane had been going through a rough patch. He, however, said that the marriage was over and that there was no trouble between them. He was cleared, and all leads went cold. Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl both told investigators they arrived home in the early morning hours and found Autumn waiting outside. When they entered the house, they found the hallway carpet bloody. The blood trail led them to the master bedroom, where they found Jane lying dead on the bloodied mattress. They speculated that an intruder may have been responsible for the murder. For 14 years, the case remained unsolved. The cold case reopened in 1999. El Dorado County Sheriff's detectives Richard Strasser and Rick Fitzgerald revisited the investigation. After poring over paperwork, they zoomed in on a news article. Connie Dahl, former girlfriend of Ricky Davis and housemate at Jane Hilton's, had given an interview to a reporter. She was quoted saying Hilton's body was lying in bed like someone placed her there in the position she would normally sleep in. This statement seemed to contradict a muffled audio recording of a statement that Davis had previously made. Detective Fitzgerald falsely thought he heard him say the body was found on the floor. Dahl was, at the time, serving a jail sentence in Oregon on unrelated charges. Detectives brought her in for an interview and began a 3-hour-long interrogation. Initially, she stuck to her original story. Over the next 18 months, though, she would be interrogated 4 times. Detectives were found to have used techniques known to increase the chances of a false confession. Dahl was systematically forced into incriminating Davis and Jane's daughter, Autumn, in the murder. Dahl was threatened with a charge of murder. If she cooperated, though, she'd be given a lenient sentence of manslaughter and serve only a year. Detective Strasser and Fitzgerald told Dahl that DNA evidence was going to be used to trace the suspect. In truth, no DNA evidence was brought into the case during that period. Testing had not been done on the DNA recovered from the scene. By showing crime scene photos and using facts from the crime, such as the bite mark on Jane's shoulder, investigators fed Dahl the information they wanted to hear. Over the course of the 4 interviews, Dahl was starting to break. She began remembering facts from the crime. This, in turn, allowed her to fabricate an entirely different account of events from the night of the murder. In one interview, Dahl said that Autumn was present during the murder of Jane and was sprayed with blood. In another, she confessed that she was probably the person that bit Jane on the shoulder. Dahl would say that the murder began with an argument between Davis and Jane. She alleged that Davis wanted Autumn to join them at a party. When Jane refused, Davis erupted in a fit of anger, leading to the death of Jane. Her story kept changing to fit the facts being fed. However, she couldn't remember the weapon used for the murder or where it was eventually hidden. Dahl had implicated her ex-boyfriend Davis in the murder of Jane Hilton. He was now the prime suspect. Ricky Davis and Autumn Anker were also interviewed following the confession of Connie Dahl. Both Davis and Anker stuck to their original accounts of the crime. Detectives again lied to Davis, telling him that Anker had also implicated him in the murder. Anker told detectives she had no reason to protect Davis when they threatened her with culpability regarding the murder. Despite their interrogation techniques, detectives could not sway Davis or Anker to change their stories. They therefore used the confession of Dahl to arrest Davis. Dahl was offered a plea bargain to testify against Davis at his trial. Davis's first trial was declared a mistrial by jurors. His second, in 2005, would eventually convict him. Dahl took the stand and testified against Davis. She told the court of how she struggled with Jane and that she herself accidentally bit the victim on the shoulder. She went on to say that she went outside as Davis continued the bloody assault on Hilton. Dahl said she could hear screaming, pleading, and gurgling as Davis continued the brutal attack. Based entirely on the testimony of Dahl's account of events, Davis was sentenced to 16 years in prison for the second-degree murder of Jane Hilton. Dahl received a lesser charge of manslaughter and received a year-long sentence in the county jail. Dahl would eventually die from a drug overdose in 2014. Meanwhile, Davis was not going down without a fight. He maintained his innocence and, in 2006, made contact with the Northern California Innocence Project. He asked if they could help him prove that he was wrongly convicted. The NCIP was founded in 2001 by Kathleen Ridolfi and Linda Starr. The project began after legislation offered convicted inmates the chance to seek DNA testing to prove their innocence. It's a non-profit clinical program of Santa Clara University's School of Law. After Davis made contact with the NCIP in 2006, his case was put through a thorough re-examination. Cooperation between the NCIP and the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office allowed for the DNA recovered from the crime scene to be retested post-conviction. Evidence from the crime scene included Hilton's nightgown and biological material found under her fingernails. The results revealed an unknown male DNA profile. DNA from Hilton's fingernails and nightgown were both found to be from the same source. DNA test results eliminated Davis, Dahl, and Anker. This proved Dahl's testimony was contradictory to the physical evidence and therefore had to have been fabricated. The DNA also proved Archie Hilton innocent. Unfortunately, he had passed away by the time results were released. The DNA profile was entered into the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, but no matches were found. Although the evidence seemed to prove Davis's consistent claim of innocence correct, there were still some hurdles that needed to be overcome. The NCIP successfully argued that had the DNA results been presented to the jury during Davis's trial, the outcome would have been different. However, until January 2017, the California standard required that new evidence point unerringly to innocence. It was considered an almost unattainable standard. In 2015, a false confession expert, Richard Leo, reviewed transcripts of Dahl's interrogations. Leo concluded that the methods used by detectives during the interrogation of Dahl were designed to pressure and persuade Dahl to adopt an account that matched the detectives' pre-existing beliefs about how and why the murder of Jane Hilton occurred. In 2016, the NCIP co-sponsored Senate Bill 1134. This bill allowed wrongfully convicted inmates like Davis to prove that new evidence would likely have been compelling to a jury. NCIP attorney Melissa O'Connell filed a petition for a new trial based on the new DNA evidence testing. Championed by former California State Senator Martha Leno, the bill was passed in January 2017, putting California's standard in line with about 43 other states. In 2019, Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malakian vacated Davis's 2005 conviction and ordered a new trial. Initially set to start in the fall of 2019, however, the judge announced the trial would take place in April 2020, citing the defense attorney's health as the catalyst for the change in date. However, the fate of the trial was about to change once again. Advancements in DNA testing led to Davis becoming the first convicted person in California and the second in the United States to be exonerated for a crime. Genetic genealogy is a fairly new DNA testing concept. It involves taking DNA evidence from a crime scene and sending it to genetic companies. These companies then search family tree databases to find potential matches. In February 2020, DNA evidence matched to a man considered an unlikely suspect. El Dorado County Attorney Vern Pearson announced in February 2020 that a new suspect had been identified as the man linked to the DNA evidence found on Jane Hilton's body. Following the arrest, many people spoke to the media about the man they knew as Michael Green. Green was a longtime resident of Roseville, California. He graduated from Oakmont High School in 1986. He was described as an easygoing, kind person, even-tempered and super chill. One classmate, who wanted to remain anonymous, could not understand why Green would go to El Dorado Hills and brutally murder a woman. According to reports, Green was 17 years old at the time of Hilton's murder. On the night of July 6, 1985, the victim's daughter, Autumn, met Green and two of his friends, Calvin and Stephen. They hung out together at the park when Autumn decided to go home and take a shower before returning. Allegedly, Autumn told her mother she was going to another friend's house for the evening. Instead, she returned to the park to join the boys. What happened next is pure speculation. Investigators believe that during this time, Green broke into the house and was confronted by Jane. In a struggle to get away, Green may have attacked her in a frenzy. Following the attack, Jane's body was discovered by Davis, Dahl, and Autumn when they returned home. Green had no criminal convictions either before or after the murder. It seems he'd led a normal life until DNA linked him to the gruesome crime. The other two boys who were with Green were tracked down shortly after his arrest. Calvin, unfortunately, had died some time ago. Stephen, however, was found and interviewed the day after the arrest. He was being treated as a witness and not a participant. Green was arrested on February 11, 2020. Since Green was a teenager at the time of the murder, he made his first appearance in juvenile court on February 19, 2020. District Attorney Vern Pearson said that, procedurally, the court had to go through some steps on the juvenile side of it. Following this, he was granted a transfer so that he could be tried as an adult. He waited 2.5 years before he would be tried in court. Green pleaded no contest on July 29, 2022. This plea means Green gave up his right to a jury trial. A jury trial meant he was to face a charge of first-degree murder. He also gave up his chance to challenge the plea or the consequences of his decision. His sentencing date was set for September 27, 2022, to be presided over by Judge Suzanne Kingsbury. At sentencing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, a professor in psychological science education, was called in an expert capacity to explain to the court the development of an adolescent. Kaufman's research explained the varying developmental needs of adolescents with regard to emotional and cognitive development. The late adolescent stage allowed an individual to understand right from wrong, yet at the same time they're also functioning under diminished capacity for impulse control. The defense called several witnesses from Green's childhood, some who even maintained relationships with him into adulthood. Each witness was asked if their opinion had changed of him since the knowledge of his confession. All witnesses agreed they'd been shocked to discover that he was responsible for the murder of Hilton. Individuals who knew him in varying capacities described him as jovial, popular, funny, and loving. These words were used to describe him before and after the murder. Green's ex-wife, Karen Green, said, "There's just not a bad bone in him." After witness statements were given, each of Jane Hilton's children presented their victim impact statements. They all described the unforgivable loss that Green inflicted upon their family. What would you do if you received an early morning call to tell you your mother is dead? The court listened to her description of the feeling of gathering her mother's belongings from the house in which she was killed. Autumn finished with a powerful declaration. "We will always have something in common, regretting the stupid decision you made 37 years ago." Hilton's son Ian echoed his sister's sentiments. He went on to explain the uncertainty the family faced and the recurring nightmares they suffered, especially after the crooked finger of blame was pointed at his own sister, Autumn. He broke down in tears as he ended with an almost inaudible remark. "All the words we say will never bring my mother back." Autumn was the last to speak. Her statements showed true agony as she recounted the cloud of suspicion she'd lived under for the last 2 decades. Recounting the day 2 detectives with thick mustaches came into her house, telling her they found the people responsible for her mother's death. She was then repeatedly accused of biting her mother and helping move her body from the floor to the bed. Autumn went on to say that if she hadn't said the word lawyer at that point, she did not know how much further the intimidation tactics of the investigators could have gone. Afterwards, Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family. In the statement, he asked Green what made him end Jane's life in such a brutal manner. "You beat her. She had numerous wounds around her head and face. By your own words, you kicked her jaw. You bit her on the shoulder. Why was that?" Linden continued to read the statement that expressed how Green didn't just murder Jane. He destroyed numerous lives in the process. Linden then asked Green if he'd given any thought about Jane and who she was. He pointed out her achievements and the love she had for each of her children. In closing arguments, Margaret Husser, Green's defense attorney, stressed the idea that he was unable to stop himself. She emphasized that he did not know what he was doing was wrong, as he was an adolescent at the time. This argument was based on the testimony of expert witness Dr. Kaufman. She asked that the court show mercy as she read off the multiple penal codes and rules of the court. Judge Kingsbury interjected by saying, "The court is not going to put him on probation," effectively ending any further comment from the defense. In response, Linden thanked the court and said the application for probation was offensive. He said, "It was a smack to this family who had endured this predicament." Linden stated that Green already got away with murder for 37 years. Placing him on probation would allow him to get away with more. Judge Kingsbury said she had heard a multitude of arguments about murder cases surrounding adolescent development. She remarked that after her 26 years on the bench, Jane Hilton's murder was by far the most brutal. Before passing her sentence, Kingsbury asked the family for their forgiveness for the trauma they had suffered, although she was not originally assigned the case. She also hoped they would heal from the pain, as it would have been their mother's wish. Kingsbury then encouraged Green to use all resources at his disposal in the California Department of Rehabilitation. "You're the key to the questions these people have. Doing that could ultimately help you with your outcome as it relates to parole," said Kingsbury. In closing, Kingsbury pointed out that she had heard from his friends that there's a great side to him and that he has much to offer. She also said he was young enough to be released and live a productive life. Green was sentenced to 15 years to life and remained at the El Dorado County Jail. He will then be transferred to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Restitution will be decided after further consideration by the court. Davis was released on February 13, 2020, and planned to celebrate over pizza with his family. His lawyer, Melissa O'Connell, said he will be entitled to more than $750,000 in state compensation for the wrongful conviction. Although the amount was high enough for him to re-enter society and start afresh, O'Connell said it could not make up for the years of freedom that he lost. Davis went on to sue the state for damages, covering the period from May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020, for a whopping $18 million. The lawsuit named El Dorado County, as well as former detectives Richard Strasser, Rick Fitzgerald, Bill Wilson, who's deceased and being sued through his estate, and Larry Hennig. Sheriff's Office pathologist Dr. Robert Anthony has also been included in the complaint. The Village Life newspaper reported that Davis was homeless after being released. The lawsuit is still pending as of 2022. In September 2022, California passed Assembly Bill 2644. This bill would, commencing January 1, 2024, prohibit law enforcement officers from employing threats, physical harm, deception, or psychologically manipulative interrogation tactics, as specified, during a custodial interrogation of a person 17 years of age or younger. The bill faced opposition, but District Attorney Vern Pearson is urging all law enforcement to stop using intimidation tactics. Pearson stated that 10 years ago, he would have viewed the methods used to get a confession differently. However, after seeing the true impact it can have, he believed there is room for change. This also comes after research points to deceptive tactics being used for years by law enforcement. Tactics that presume guilt and focus on getting a confession rather than getting the full story. The district attorney is implementing this new policy in his office and is urging other district attorneys to do the same. El Dorado County DA's office will now reject any case where the primary evidence is a confession obtained using threats, lies, or psychologically manipulative interrogation tactics. These measures are to ensure that no one is ever again convicted based on a coerced false confession, like the case of Ricky Davis. Pearson personally apologized to all involved in the miscarriage of justice caused by the tactics used by then investigators into the brutal 1985 murder of Jane Hilton. After 37 years, the right man is finally facing justice. Yet the lives of so many were left broken by mistakes and false accusations. For Jane Hilton's family, hopefully, they can now pick up the pieces after being divided over the innocence of their own sister, Autumn. Ricky Davis can never regain the liberty he lost. And Michael Green destroyed not only the lives of the victim's family and friends, but the lives that he touched in the years before and after the murder. What are your thoughts on today's case? Did Michael Green deserve the sentence he received? Does his clean record minus the murder make him innocent of intentional murder? How could he let an innocent man take the blame for his actions? Can Ricky Davis ever get his life back on track, even when he does receive compensation? And why is it taking so long? The Vicky Glass case. Vicky Glass was born on September 21, 1979, in Stockton-on-Tees, a trading town situated on the banks of the River Tees. At that time, it was part of the extinct county of Cleveland, later reassigned to the county of Durham in England. She was the daughter of Deborah and Anthony Glass and had an older sister named Claire, who was a year older than her. Vicky entered the world prematurely, weighing less than 3.3 pounds, and both her life and her mother's were in danger. Eventually, Vicky's parents separated, and when she was 6 years old, her mother remarried Colin Goodall, a man also living in Stockton-on-Tees. This new union gave the young girl an additional stepsister named Cheryl, who was older than her, and a younger brother named Thomas. From that point on, Vicky lived with them. Vicky had light skin, light brown eyes, and long hair, a look she maintained from childhood into adolescence when she decided to cut her hair. Despite being born with a hearing impairment, music was Vicky's passion, and she considered herself a huge fan of Michael Jackson. Her musical inclination led her to join the local jazz band at a very young age. Clearly, she was a determined young lady. She remained with the group from the ages of 13 to 18, during which time she always enjoyed the trips they took to perform in various places. According to her acquaintances, she felt proud when she performed. Vicky also had a deep love for animals, particularly cats. In fact, she rescued one, which she named Sooty. Vicky attended Blakestone High School, also located in Stockton-on-Tees, and had a keen interest in running and sports in general. However, she was very diligent and never neglected her studies. Later on, she secured a job at a local factory in Teesside. While some people who knew her saw Vicky as a quiet and somewhat shy girl, her family and closest friends knew her to be very cheerful. They said she had a heart of gold and was very affectionate. She was indeed a much-loved person who seemingly had everything and lived in a healthy and happy environment. Unfortunately, her life took a dramatic turn when she was nearing her 18th birthday. According to her mother, she began associating with the wrong crowd and started using drugs. The young woman became addicted to heroin and became so dependent on narcotics that she started offering sex services to support her addiction, eventually leading her to leave her home. Over time, Vicky began frequenting the suburbs of Middlesbrough, about 8 kilometers to the east of Stockton-on-Tees, particularly a truck parking lot where transport companies used to park their vehicles overnight. By December 1999, Vicky had developed a chest condition and was homeless. Through a friend, she met a man who lived in Middlesbrough who offered her shelter while she recovered her health. The homeowner took care of her, and the place became her permanent residence. He assisted her in scheduling her medical appointments and ensured she didn't miss them. Despite the man's efforts to help the girl heal and improve her life, she continued with her addiction to illegal substances and continued offering her services as a sex worker. In the year 2000, Vicky continued with the same lifestyle, and so her 21st birthday arrived on September 21st. Unfortunately, the joy quickly turned into tragedy. According to case reports, on that Thursday night, the young woman worked and also celebrated. Apparently, Friday the 22nd passed without incident, and by Saturday the 23rd, Vicky went to her home in the company of a friend to change clothes. Around noon, both of them left the place. Hours later, past midnight, Vicky met with a client on Borough Road, located in the center of Middlesbrough. They then went to 104 Princes Road, a place frequented by drug users and sex workers. She was dressed in a white shirt, light gray pants, and white sneakers. Some time later, the young woman and her client took a taxi down Union Street and went back to this male's home in Norton, Stockton. After spending some time there, Vicky called a taxi line she often used. The driver picked her up at around 4 a.m. on Sunday, September 24th, and about 20 minutes later, he dropped her off in Middlesbrough, specifically at the junction of Union Street and Eschwood Square. This is just to the rear of a pub that was then called the Shipmate. As soon as the taxi driver dropped the woman off at the designated destination, he returned to the headquarters of the taxi company he worked for. That night and in the following days, Vicky did not return to her house. Her friend, the man who had helped her when she needed it most, became worried as her absence prolonged. He started asking about her at all the places she frequented. Since no one could provide information about her whereabouts, he decided to contact the police to report her as missing. In the same month, a man named Sean Tooley was arrested. His arrest was related to the asphyxiation death of a 20-year-old woman named Kelly Mallinson, who also engaged in sex work to finance her addiction and frequented the same places Vicky did. Tooley was sentenced to life in prison a year later. On Friday, November 3rd, 6 weeks after Vicky's disappearance, a man who was walking dogs made a gruesome discovery on a trail in the town of Danby, a picturesque village located in North Yorkshire. Around 6 in the morning, the man came across the naked and decomposed corpse of a woman. Immediately, amidst his shock, the citizen notified the police. The remains were taken to the coroner's office, where experts determined that it was Vicky. Due to the state of the remains, pathologists concluded that she had been exposed to the moorland winds for several weeks. Although they couldn't establish the cause of her death, They stated that there appeared to be no wounds and no signs of abuse, sexual or otherwise, nor any indication that she had died from drowning. Officials who arrived at the scene searched the area surrounding where Vicky's body was found for clues and tried to locate the victim's clothing, but their efforts yielded no results. Cleveland and North Yorkshire police officers initiated investigations. A team of 40 officers tried to reconstruct the unfortunate young woman's last steps during the night of September 23rd and the early hours of September 24th. They interviewed both the taxi driver and the employees of the places Vicky frequented, as well as the friend who had given her shelter and some witnesses and colleagues. Sergeant Brian Dunn, who was leading the investigation at that time, made several public appeals for assistance from the community. They needed someone to provide information that could be useful in catching the perpetrator. Vicky's family was devastated by the tragic death of the young woman. On that day, when her mother returned from work, the police were at her house. Her initial reaction was to ask if they had found her daughter and if she was okay. But when she received the news, she began to tremble. Until that moment, she was convinced that her daughter would reappear alive, and every contact she had with the police involved asking if they would help Vicky get off drugs once they found her. On November 13th, Vicky's mother, Deborah, lashed out at the press for labeling her daughter as a drug addict. She emphasized that this fact was irrelevant and that the important thing was that she was a 21-year-old girl who had lost her life in a brutal manner. The following week, posters with Vicky's photograph were placed in various locations, especially in the places where the girl had been on the night she disappeared. In that same month of November, the police reported that they had spoken to more than 500 people and had taken statements from 150, including former clients of the young woman, taxi drivers, neighbors, and truck drivers. They also analyzed over 60 hours of closed-circuit camera recordings located in the areas the victim used to frequent. November was passing when Vicky's father, Anthony, and her stepfather, Colin, went together to the site where the lifeless body of the girl was found. On that day, Deborah's absence was notable, but the mother was too affected to participate in the ceremony. In addition to placing flowers, they prayed for any clues or information that would lead to the truth about what had happened. Anthony sent a plea to members of the community to help them find closure. In doing so, he stressed that they only needed a phone call to end the nightmare they were living, not knowing what had happened to their daughter. The investigation focused on the hundreds of truck drivers who used to frequent the parking lot in Middlesbrough. As part of the inquiries, a 39-year-old married man was arrested, but his identity was never revealed. Eventually, his connection to the case was ruled out and he was released. In January 2002, the investigators in charge of the case arrested a 47-year-old unmarried man, identified as Eric Coates, who resided in North Yorkshire. This was the third time officials had interviewed him in relation to the case, as he had been unable to provide a credible alibi for his whereabouts on the day Vicky disappeared. The agents found it suspicious that he couldn't remember certain details precisely. The man admitted that he had been with sex workers but denied any involvement in Vicky's death. He also revealed that one or two girls had mentioned to him that the crime was related to a drug debt settlement. His house, which he shared with his parents, was searched by the police, as were other properties belonging to his family. During the searches, officers seized computer equipment, clothing, diaries, videotapes, and a vehicle. Additionally, this individual had a criminal record. He had been arrested and imprisoned for 15 months in 1994 for unlawfully restraining and assaulting a sex worker in Middlesbrough. However, he was acquitted of charges of attempted sexual assault and indecent assault against the same woman. Ultimately, it was determined that Eric had nothing to do with Vicky's crime, and he was released. His father, a former county councillor in North Yorkshire, stated that they were as interested as the police in finding out who had taken the young woman's life. Years later, in 2006, Eric was imprisoned and sentenced to 14 years for pleading guilty to 15 sexual offenses against girls aged between 11 and 14 years. In this context, it was also revealed that his father had faced 12 charges of sexual offenses but was not brought to trial due to health reasons. Returning to 2002, in July, Cleveland police questioned a man identified as John Taylor, who was serving a life sentence after pleading guilty to the kidnapping and murder of a 16-year-old girl in Leeds, West Yorkshire. The investigations into Taylor also yielded no results, and he was ruled out as a suspect in the attack on Vicky. In December 2006, detectives from Cleveland police reported that they had contacted their colleagues in Suffolk to explore possible connections between Vicky's case and the tragic deaths of 5 other sex workers. For these crimes, truck driver Steve Wright had been arrested, and 2 years later, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Subsequently, the authorities in Cleveland ruled out any connection of the man with the death. When the tragedy reached its 10-year mark, Vicky's parents visited the place where their daughter was found lifeless and placed flowers in her honor. Deborah told reporters that she thought of her daughter every day and that it was a pain that would never go away. In December 2010, the case file was once again examined, searching for possible links, such as a man identified as Stephen Griffiths, who had taken the lives of 3 sex workers in Bradford, West Yorkshire, and was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, at the beginning of January 2011, any possible connection to Vicky's disappearance was ruled out. For the family, the pain of loss was compounded by the uncertainty of not knowing what happened to her and the belief that the person responsible for her death remained at large. Vicky's grandmother, who was very close to the girl, was deeply affected and passed away a year later. Her mother, Deborah, passed away in 2015 at the age of 55 without ever getting to know the person who took her daughter's life. Anthony later admitted that during the first 24 months after the tragedy, he couldn't work and lost his job. He confessed that he couldn't smile, and it took him a long time to regain belief in himself and convince himself that it wasn't his fault. In 2017, the Cleveland police requested a grant to fund 3 separate historic cases in the vicinity of Middlesbrough. A year later, the Home Office agreed to provide approximately £3.7 million, about $4.6 million at the current exchange rate, to fund a historic investigation unit aimed at thoroughly reviewing unsolved cases. In addition to Vicky's case, officials also reopened the cases of Donna Keogh, who disappeared in 1998 at the age of 17, and Rachel Wilson, who disappeared in 2002, with her body being located in a ditch 10 years later. There were some similarities in these cases, such as the age and occupation of the victims and the fact that all 3 occurred in Middlesbrough. In October 2018, a website published information that rekindled hopes of uncovering the truth about Vicky's death. The news referred to a high-profile convicted offender. The inmate had been a taxi driver and was responsible for ending the life of a 22-year-old office worker who went missing in March 2011, and her remains were found in a grave. According to the media report, at the time of his arrest, the man confessed to the murder of another young woman, age 20, committed 8 years earlier, and he provided information about the location of the body. However, no connection between the criminal and Vicky's case could be established. In September 2021, the police announced that they had significant new lines of investigation regarding the unsolved case. In this context, they made a fresh public appeal urging anyone who knew any details about what might have happened to Vicky in 2000 to contact the authorities. The officers expressed hope because they now had more modern forensic techniques and plans to interview potential witnesses and examine over 2,000 hours of CCTV footage. During this time, one of the detectives on the case mentioned that in the preceding 12 months, a lot of work had been done on Vicky's case. He explained that a detailed review of the original investigation had resulted in 300 recommendations, with the primary one being to initiate a new investigation, leveraging advancements in forensic science. In the same year, the case of Rachel, mentioned earlier, was closed with the arrest of a 62-year-old man identified as Keith Hall, who was sentenced to 18 years in prison. In 2022, the investigators leading the case appealed to the community to collaborate by providing any information that could be helpful in solving the mystery surrounding Vicky's death. They were particularly interested in identifying the truck driver who was seen with the young woman hours before her disappearance. To achieve this goal, they released CCTV images in which Vicky is seen walking with a man in a parking lot on the night of her disappearance. And later, she is seen conversing with a truck driver to whom she may have left some of her belongings. This latter man was described as an individual with white skin, broad shoulders, aged between 34 and 38, and having a distinctive mark on his face. The police also launched a website with Vicky's name in an effort to gather information about the case. As part of these initiatives, detectives spoke with hundreds of people, And while they collected a significant amount of information, the identity of the truck driver remains unknown. That year, the family issued a statement reaffirming their deep love for Vicky and the difficult times they were going through. They emphasized that Deborah, Vicky's mother, passed away without answers, knowing that the person who took her daughter's life was still on the streets. On November 3, 2023, 23 years had passed since Vicky's lifeless body was found, and the investigation to find the person responsible for her death is one of the most extensive in the history of Cleveland police in England. Each year that goes by without justice is another year of suffering for the relatives of Vicky Glass, who would be 44 years old today. The police stated that in order to provide closure to the family, they need the support of the community. They are confident that someone out there possesses the missing piece to solve the puzzle and expressly called on that person to come forward to the authorities to help uncover the truth. Police immediately rushed to the scene of the crime, hoping to save 9-year-old Andrew and his 14-month-old sister, Naomi. An unknown man had committed a ruthless attack on the priest and his family. Leaving no traces behind, the criminal made it one of the detectives' most challenging cases in the detectives' careers. Fortunately, they managed to find witnesses who had seen everything. Their testimonies helped uncover the truth about what had really happened to the Hawkinsmith family. In 2013, in Danville, Kentucky, 35-year-old priest Michael Hawkinsmith, who had previously worked as a manager at a local pawn shop, had to take full control of the pawn shop due to the former owner's health condition. As a former priest, Michael had always been honest with people. He easily found common ground with others and was always willing to help. When he decided to get married, no one doubted his choice. Angie was his first love, and everyone saw her as a very sweet and kind girl. Michael literally worshipped the ground she walked on. When the couple had children, their relationship became even stronger. Together, they were a very happy family. As the Hawkinsmith family expanded, so did their business. The pawn shop, ABC Gold, games, and more became a successful family venture, attracting regular customers like broker Dan Smith, with whom they often conducted business on Fridays. Life seemed perfect for the Hawkinsmiths until one day in 2013 when an unknown man decided to disrupt their peaceful existence. 6 minutes after the phone call, police officers arrived at the scene of the crime. When they entered the building, their attention was immediately drawn to a large, bloody trail which led them to Michael Hawkinsmith. Moments later, they found his 38-year-old wife, Angie, and on the other side of the counter, they discovered the third victim of the crime, 60-year-old broker Dan Smith. All 3 victims had gunshot wounds to the head and torso. A few minutes later, officers found Andrew Hawkinsmith and his little sister Naomi hiding in a closet. The officers' accounts indicated the unimaginable horror these young children had endured. Suddenly, the 9-year-old boy and his 14-month-old sister were left orphaned, having lost both parents. Upon examining the crime scene, police found 14 spent .22 caliber shell casings and 3 intact bullets, along with a briefcase that belonged to Dan Smith. The victim's personal belongings and all the cash in the register were left untouched, suggesting that robbery was not the motive for the crime. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the pawn shop, posing a significant obstacle to the investigation. The police had no choice but to rely on finding potential witnesses to the crime. An employee of the nearby Rainbowy Cleaners was able to describe a car that had parked near the building that morning. It was a silver minivan driven by a large man with a thick beard. While one group of investigators searched the surrounding area, another informed the closest relatives about the tragedy that had befallen their loved ones. Michael's parents found it difficult to accept the circumstances that someone in their right mind could wish harm to their children. Nevertheless, they tried to find any positive aspect in the situation, and the fact that their grandchildren had survived could not but rejoice them. If they hadn't been for Andrew, they only would have Gail Ross Smith. Soon, the tragic news reached the daughter of the third victim, Dan Smith. He was involved in buying precious metals and skillfully adapted to the specifics of his work, easily finding common ground with different people. His business involved handling large sums of cash, sometimes exceeding hundreds of thousands of dollars. This led the police to consider the theory that Dan Smith himself could have been the primary target of the criminal. Tracking the man's movements revealed that before he arrived at the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop, he had visited Lawson's jewelry store in Harrodsburg, located 10 miles northeast of Danville. In the jewelry store, investigators found a surveillance camera positioned on the far wall to capture every visitor entering and exiting the store. They hoped that the recording would help them determine if anyone had been following Dan Smith. Smith entered the store at 8:16 in the morning, and there were no other customers in the building at the time. He was carrying the same briefcase that was later found at the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop. After greeting the woman behind the counter with a smile, headed to the back of the store sometime later, Dan Smith reappeared on the footage, coming out from the back of the store, saying something to an elderly woman who had just entered, and then immediately leaving. It was a typical day in the life of the jewelry store. The external camera recording showed nothing suspicious. The police were left to helplessly monitor the man who had no idea he would soon be at the center of a tragic event. Meanwhile, 9-year-old Andrew Hawkinsmith was taken to the police station to give his testimony. Andrew described how he had been at the pawn shop with his parents when Dan Smith arrived carrying a bag full of money. While his father and Dan were talking, the stranger entered and immediately demanded the bag. According to the boy, Dan Smith immediately handed over his briefcase, after which the stranger shot him. My father asked him to stop, but he also shot him with a pistol similar to the one I play with, Andrew said. Meanwhile, the mother instructed Andrew to take Naomi to the back of the store and hide in the closet. Andrew took his little sister and hid. It was then that the criminal aimed the gun at Angie. I don't know who he is and why he did it, but it seems to me that the reason was money, the 9-year-old boy concluded. He described the stranger as a very tall man with a blonde beard that looked fake, matching the description provided by a witness from Rainbow Cleaners. To follow all possible leads, the police's next step was to thoroughly examine the business run by the Hawkinsmith family. It turned out that the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop had another owner, Steve Devine. While he usually attended Friday deals with Dan Smith, he was absent on the tragic morning of September 20th. This information raised concerns, making determining his whereabouts a top priority. Steve Devine explained that he had developed an allergy that morning and was forced to cancel all his appointments, a story confirmed by his wife. The alibi and the fact that Steve Devine did not own a silver minivan helped to rule him out as a suspect. He also explained why there were no surveillance cameras in the pawn shop. According to him, the security system had been removed by the previous owner, Kenneth Allen Keith, and the new owners had not yet installed a replacement. 48-year-old Keith, like his deceased friend Michael Hawkinsmith, was a priest. Pastor Keith sold the pawn shop when he was diagnosed with brain cancer, but he remained the owner of another similar establishment, Gold Rush Buyers in Pulaski County, neighboring Danville's Boyle County. Michael's family revealed that he prayed for his friend every evening, hoping for his recovery. Their friendship, which began when Michael worked at a youth church camp, had lasted for 15 years. The Hawkinsmith family always held Pastor Keith in high regard, and for their son Andrew, he was like a beloved uncle. With no significant leads, investigators decided to try their luck in finding possible street surveillance systems near the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop. They found a camera on the office building of the real estate office, Danville Rentals. The surveillance footage captured a silver minivan at 8:45 in the morning, but the image was too blurry to identify the license plate or the make of the vehicle. Once again, police had to rely on the witness's testimony from Rainbow Cleaners, which described the car as an old model with a distinctive square body shape. The car in the video clearly showed a square rear bumper that matched this description. The color, type, and shape of the car all indicated that the police had found the criminal's vehicle. They continued to search for surveillance systems farther and farther from the pawn shop. At 8:17 in the morning, the camera at the local Ephraim McDowell Hospital captured the same vehicle. And finally, investigators were able to determine that it was a silver Dodge minivan. Michael and Angela's family organized a candlelight vigil in their memory. Hundreds of compassionate people attended that evening, demonstrating the depth of love for their lost ones. Similarly, like the Hawkinsmith family, Dan Smith's close relatives were outraged that the whims of another had led to the loss of their loved one. Despite their grief, they chose not to let anger overshadow their other emotions and joined in the funeral proceedings. Meanwhile, the Danville Police Department appealed to the public for any information about the criminal or his vehicle. Immediately after this, on September 24th, the police received a call from Tracy Harold, a pastor in Warren, Michigan. He claimed to be a friend of Kenneth Keith and mentioned that during their last conversation, they touched on the topic of the murder in Danville. And at that moment, Mr. Keith seemed to change. Pastor Kenneth Allen informed his friend that on that particular day, he was driving to Danville for medicine for his wife. He also expressed a sense of guilt for what happened as he had given Michael Hawkinsmith the opportunity to become the owner of his former business. Keith put forward the theory that Dan Smith himself could have been the main target of the attacker. Keith explained that Dan would come to him every Sunday to pawn all his gold, always carrying large sums of cash with him. Keith speculated that someone might have tracked Dan's route and ultimately targeted him, but there was more to the story. As it turned out, the pastor's relationship with the Hawkinsmith family was not as everyone had believed. These words raised suspicions, leading to Pastor Keith being added to the list of suspects. To verify his alibi, investigators decided to review the surveillance footage from the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, where, according to the pastor, he bought medicine for his wife. At 9:24 in the morning, a man entered the pharmacy, indeed Pastor Kenneth Allen Keith. But he looked nothing like the man who had committed the triple attack just minutes earlier. He was not wearing a green jacket or a beard, which were distinctive features of the assailant. However, this did not rule out his involvement in the attack. There was a 7-minute gap between Andrew Hawkinsmith's call to the police and the pastor's arrival at the pharmacy. The police decided to check if it was possible to travel from the crime scene to the Good Neighbor Pharmacy in such a short time. They found that the trip took about 5 minutes in total, so it was plausible to commit the murders, quickly get into a car, and reach the pharmacy to establish a solid alibi. The key clue was that Pastor Keith had an unregistered 2008 Dodge minivan, which was silver. However, all the evidence found was circumstantial, and it was not enough for an arrest. So investigators turned to Tracy Harold to participate in a series of fake phone calls aimed at the suspect. Luckily, Tracy agreed. During these calls, Pastor Keith finally revealed his true feelings towards the Hawkinsmith family. And then what everyone had been waiting for happened. Keith began discussing details of the case that had not been made public. Following that, Pastor Kenneth Keith explained that he left Danville and returned to Somerset. He then took his car to the car wash to prepare it for a planned family vacation. At 10:50 in the morning, Keith was seen on camera walking down the hallway to the cashier's counter. With a noticeable smile, it seemed clear that he was not involved in the dreadful crime that occurred earlier that morning. The external camera footage covering the parking lot showed Pastor Chameth leaving the car wash in the same silver Dodge at 11:25, matching all the images previously obtained from various surveillance systems in Danville. At that point, they had enough evidence to arrest the suspect. He was offered a polygraph test to prove or alleviate his involvement in the pawn shop crime. But his response was rather unusual. Keith stated that he would not be able to pass the polygraph successfully because during his military service, he was tasked with eliminating 3 individuals. The investigators obtained a warrant to search Kenneth Allen Keith's pawn shop, where they discovered a fake beard and a significant amount of cash. The police could not find any legitimate explanation for how he acquired most of the money. They also found bundles of bills wrapped in a ribbon with the name of the bank that issued them, revealing Dan Smith as their client. Further investigation revealed that the money found in Keith's pawn shop had recently been withdrawn from the account of a dead broker. Additionally, several .22 caliber casings were found in Keith's pawn shop. According to ballistics analysis, they were fired from the same weapon used to shoot the parents of young Andrew and Naomi. Based on all the evidence found, Kenneth Allen Keith was charged with 3 counts of deliberate homicide and first-degree robbery. It turned out that Pastor Keith believed that Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Devine had conspired to get rid of him from the business. Knowing that Dan Smith carried large sums of money, Keith decided to exact his revenge on the day of their planned meeting at the pawn shop. Keith aimed to mislead law enforcement into thinking the crime was motivated by robbery. In reality, Michael Hawkinsmith and his partner, Steve Devine, had no involvement in the imagined conspiracy against Keith. During the investigation, no evidence of discreditable activities by Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Devine was found. On September 20th, the criminal arrived in Danville in his silver Dodge Caravan. He circled the pawn shop for a while until he noticed Dan Smith's car parked nearby. The first victim was the broker himself, followed by Michael and then Angela Hawkinsmith. The pastor then took all the cash from Dan Smith's case and calmly left the crime scene, stopping at the Good Neighbor Pharmacy to be captured on its surveillance cameras and secure an alibi. His decision to go to the car wash was another attempt to remove traces and destroy any evidence that might have been left on his vehicle. In 2017, just before the trial, Kenneth Allen Keith pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Before the trial, investigators obtained medical documents from the Veterans Hospital and discovered that the pastor had never had a brain tumor. How could someone who seemed so spiritually inclined commit such a heinous crime? Furthermore, how was he going to live with the knowledge of what he had done? The mysterious case of Johnia Berry. In a small American town called Bristol, Tennessee, Johnia Berry was born on August 26, 1983. She was a happy and friendly person who had many friends and loved to have fun at parties. When she was in school, she was also part of the local cheerleading team. After finishing high school, Johnia went to East Tennessee State University to study psychology and criminology. During her college years, she met Jason White, and they became a couple, eventually getting engaged right before they graduated. In late 2004, when she was 21 years old, Johnia decided to get a master's degree in psychology. This led her to move temporarily to Knoxville, another city, for her studies. While studying, she worked part-time at a children's educational center and discovered her passion for helping children. Her boyfriend, Jason, continued his studies in a different state, working towards a law degree. Even though they were far apart, they stayed in touch and planned their wedding. In Knoxville, Johnia initially stayed in her friend Jason Amami's apartment. They both went to college together and later moved to Knoxville. They shared an apartment with 2 bedrooms, and Jason let Johnia stay there until she found her own place. Johnia had 2 part-time jobs, one at a jewelry store and the other at a children's hospital. On the Sunday night of December 5th, after finishing work at the store, Johnia went to the mall to do some Christmas shopping. When she got back home, she wrapped presents for the children at the educational center, talked to her neighbor, and then went to her room. She also spoke to her boyfriend on the phone before going to bed. Around 4 in the morning, Jason Amami heard a scream from a woman. He thought Johnia was having a bad dream, so he went to her room. But instead, he found a stranger with a knife. The stranger attacked Jason and they had a fight. Eventually, Jason managed to push the attacker away and ran out of the apartment. He went to the nearest convenience store, which was almost a kilometer away, to call for help. When the store clerk saw Jason, who was covered in blood, they called 911. Jason explained what had happened to the police when they arrived. The police went to their apartment and found Johnia in the hallway that connected 5 apartments. She was still alive, but barely conscious. When they asked her about the attacker, she could only give weak clues. The police searched the whole building and the area nearby, but they couldn't find the attacker. They rushed Johnia to the nearest hospital, but the doctors couldn't save her, even though they tried their best. The doctor said she had more than 20 stab wounds, and it was very unlikely she could survive. As for Jason, he had 8 wounds from the attacker, but only one was very serious. He got medical help and his life was not in danger. Meanwhile, the detectives started to investigate the crime scene. They found blood in the hallway, showing that Johnia had tried to ask her neighbors for help, but no one had opened their doors. Right next to Johnia's room, they found the murder weapon, which turned out to be a kitchen knife that belonged to Jason. The attacker had used it with such force that it got bent and damaged. The police also found blood near the back door of the apartment and on the stairs leading to the street. Since Jason and Johnia had left through the front door, The detectives thought the most likely explanation was that the killer had escaped through the back door. In Jason's room, they discovered another clue, a partial footprint, which the attacker might have left when he followed Jason and attacked him. Because of the brutal way the attacker had taken Jonia's life, the police suspected that the motive behind the crime was personal. At first, the detectives started looking into Jonia's boyfriend, even though he was far away, about 1,000 kilometers from Knoxville. But all his friends and family said that Johnia and her boyfriend had a wonderful relationship, and he had no reason to commit such a cruel crime. He found out about Jonia's death when her mother called him at 10 in the morning. He said that after hearing the news, he fainted and took a long time to recover. He was in no condition to do anything, so he had to ask his neighbor to help him book a plane ticket and pack his suitcase. The investigators carefully checked his alibi and realized that he couldn't have physically traveled to Knoxville and back by morning. So they ruled him out as a suspect and turned their attention to Jonia's neighbor instead. In contrast to the victim's boyfriend, this neighbor had no solid alibi and had been inside the apartment with her, raising suspicions that he might be the culprit. Friends and family of Johnia were also skeptical of him. Some believed he could be the likely killer, while others accused him of fleeing the apartment, leaving Johnia behind. This suspicion ran so deep that the victim's parents didn't even want him to attend her funeral. Shortly after Jason was released from the hospital, investigators began questioning him. He stuck to his initial account. He heard screams, saw an unfamiliar man, and was attacked. After managing to fend off the attacker, Jason rushed to the front door and out into the street, seeking help from the neighbors. He believed that Johnia had also managed to escape the apartment because he couldn't hear her screams. However, the police had reservations about accepting this version of events. What initially raised doubts about Jason were his injuries. 7 of the 8 wounds were superficial, and the last one on his right arm could have been acquired either while defending himself or during an attack. Additionally, investigators found no signs of forced entry into the apartment, suggesting that the person responsible might have been inside already. Jason claimed that he had taken out the trash through the back door that night, but couldn't remember if he had locked it or not. Detectives continued to press him, paying close attention to which door he used to exit the apartment onto the street. Jason insisted that he had left through the front door, but the police suspected he might be lying. If Jason had indeed exited through the back door, it would explain the presence of bloodstains near the door leading to the stairs, further raising suspicions against him. Moreover, the police accused him of using and selling illegal drugs and of being aggressive when he couldn't get his fix. The young man denied all these allegations, but investigators continued to level various charges against him. After several hours at the police station, the detectives proposed a polygraph test of him. Surprisingly, Jason agreed. The investigators brought in an expert who asked him leading questions. And at the end of the session, they informed him that he had failed the test, indicating that he was providing false answers. Upon hearing this, Jason became emotionally distraught, shouting that he had nothing to do with the crime, that his life was in danger, and that the real criminal was still on the loose. However, the detectives remained unconvinced. Nevertheless, they couldn't charge him with the murder due to the lack of concrete evidence. They had to wait for laboratory experts to complete their examination of the few pieces of evidence found in the apartment, and an unexpected twist soon emerged. During their analysis of the murder weapon, the knife, they discovered 3 DNA samples, those of the deceased girl, Jason, and an unidentified man. Additionally, the unknown man's DNA was found in Jonia's room on the back door handle and on the staircase used by the criminal to exit onto the street. Furthermore, they uncovered a fingerprint on the knife handle marked by the victim's blood. That did not match Jason's fingerprint. These discoveries led the police to doubt that Jason was the murderer. The evidence strongly indicated that another person had been in the apartment that night. However, when they checked the DNA sample against existing databases, they found no matches. Even though investigators had ruled out Jason as a suspect, public opinion continued to cast doubt on him, accusing him of leaving his girlfriend behind and fleeing instead of protecting her. Furthermore, Jason started experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. A significant development soon came to light. It was revealed that the polygraph operator had misinterpreted the test results. and there was no indication that Jason was lying. Additionally, there was no concrete evidence linking the young man to illegal substances. It had been used as leverage, but more importantly, the severity of Jason's injuries had been initially underestimated. In reality, Jason had suffered serious damage to his lung and neck with little hope for a full recovery. Due to these inaccuracies in police reports, the insurance company only covered 25% of his treatment costs, leaving Jason facing severe financial hardship. Once the police no longer considered him a suspect, they began questioning Jason as a witness. From his account, they managed to create a rough description of the attacker. The situation was complicated by the fact that Jason hadn't gotten a clear look at the assailant's face. The apartment was dimly lit, and the attacker had pounced on him as soon as he exited the room. The investigators also stumbled upon something intriguing in Jonia's room: a cap along with discs and a stereo player near the back staircase. Initially, they thought these items might belong to either the victim or Jason, but Jason denied any connection to them. According to him, none of these items were in his apartment, suggesting they were left behind by the killer. The investigators shared a rough sketch of the suspect with the media, and after it was publicized, the police received hundreds of leads. People reported individuals who vaguely resembled the sketch, prompting detectives to pursue each of these leads. One lead stood out to the investigators. They learned about a group of teenagers in the area who had been breaking into houses with the intent to steal. One of these teenagers, a 19-year-old named Michael, bore a resemblance to the suspect's sketch. The police initiated a search for him, which was complicated because he was already wanted for theft. Now, with the possibility of his involvement in a murder, 2 police units joined the search for Michael. They eventually located him and brought him in for questioning. The investigators immediately focused on Michael's shoes, which had a tread pattern similar to the footprint left by the killer. They collected a DNA sample and fingerprints from Michael and sent them to the experts for analysis. Meanwhile, they interrogated him, and during this process, they received an unexpected revelation. Michael quickly admitted that he and a friend had indeed entered Jonia's apartment that night. According to his account, they had planned to steal valuable items, but his friend had taken a knife and attacked Johnia. However, the detectives soon began to doubt Michael's story. Firstly, the details he provided didn't align with the actual events. Secondly, there was no evidence of the presence of 2 strangers at the crime scene. The laboratory results further confirmed their skepticism. Michael's DNA and fingerprints did not match those found at the murder scene. The same held true for his shoes. The tread pattern did not match the one in Jason's room. Ultimately, the police concluded that Michael had fabricated the story. While it may sound unusual, such false admissions occur relatively frequently in high-profile cases. Some individuals falsely claim guilt for various reasons, including seeking attention or hoping for a reward for information. It remains unclear what motivated Michael, but his story turned out to be entirely untrue. Following that, investigators interviewed over 1,000 potential suspects and gathered around 400 DNA samples, but none of them matched the evidence. Early in the investigation, a reward had been offered for information leading to the case's resolution. As each month passed, the reward amount increased, and by December 2005, 1 year after the murder, it had reached $60,000. Adding to this, the state governor chipped in an additional $20,000 from his own funds, drawing even more public attention to the case. Despite the abundance of leads, all of them eventually led to dead ends, and the case remained unsolved for several years. In 2007, the victim's parents decided to take action by seeking changes in state legislation. They found it perplexing that the fingerprints and DNA of the murderer were not in any databases. Given the brutality of the crime, the parents refused to believe it was the perpetrator's first offense. They later discovered that according to Tennessee laws, fingerprints and DNA samples were only collected from convicted criminals. Johnia's parents were determined to change this. They played an active role in crafting a new law that mandated the collection of these samples from all individuals arrested for violent crimes. Authorities supported this initiative, and the law was enacted in May 2007. 2 months later, a breakthrough occurred in the case. The police arrested Taylor Lee Olson, a 22-year-old, for violating the terms of his probation. Olson had a long history of criminal activities, primarily involving theft, check forgery, and auto theft, and he had been arrested multiple times before. Surprisingly, his fingerprints and DNA had never been collected, even though he had a history of run-ins with the law. Olson lived with his girlfriend and their newborn daughter, but his criminal activities persisted. It was revealed that Olson had already come to the investigators' attention 5 months earlier when they received a tip about his possible involvement in the murder. However, for reasons unknown, the police had not pursued DNA samples for analysis at that time. Nevertheless, with his new arrest for probation violation, they finally decided to question him about Jonia's case. Olson eventually confessed his involvement in the murder and willingly provided a DNA sample. When the lab results came in, it was confirmed that Taylor's DNA was a complete match with the sample found in the victim's apartment. Following this, they collected his fingerprints, which also matched the fingerprint on the murder weapon. Olson was subsequently arrested, and detectives began to question him. Initially, Olson said he was not guilty, but he eventually decided to confess to his actions. Taylor claimed that on that night, he had intended to steal Jonia's car and had entered her apartment through the back door to find the car keys. When he entered her room, she woke up and began screaming. In response, Olson grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her multiple times. However, he insisted that he hadn't intended to kill anyone and it had all occurred accidentally. Detectives had doubts about the truthfulness of some details and leaned towards believing that Taylor had premeditated the murder. It was possible that he had been stalking the victim for some time, indirectly supported by the fact that Jonia's friends had reported someone following her in a car. At the time, no evidence was found to substantiate this, but after Olson's arrest, it seemed increasingly plausible. Despite this, there was little doubt about his culpability. His DNA and fingerprints were present on the murder weapon, strongly indicating his involvement. Olson's trial was slated to commence in mid-2008, and by that point, he had already retained a lawyer. Apparently, his legal counsel advised him to retract his confession, and Taylor presented a new version of events to the detectives. Now he claimed that he had entered Jonia's apartment with his friend named Noah Cox. According to this revised account, when Olson entered Jonia's room to retrieve the car keys, she allegedly woke up, seized a knife, and stabbed him several times. Olson then fled through the back door while his friend entered Jonia's room, disarmed her, and killed her. This new narrative raised suspicions among the police. They found no fingerprints or DNA from other individuals at the crime scene, making it appear unlikely that anyone else was involved. Detectives awaited the start of the trial, but it never occurred. On March 28, 2008, Taylor Olson took his own life in his prison cell. Alongside him, several suicide notes were discovered, addressed to his family, Jonia's relatives, and the police. In the note to the detectives, he once again alleged that his friend Noah Cox was the actual perpetrator and also apologized to Jonia's family and his own. Detectives continued to believe that Olson was responsible for the murder, and repeatedly questioned No. However, they found no evidence implicating him. Jonia's parents also remained skeptical, believing that Olson was lying. In their view, if Taylor was truly innocent, he wouldn't have taken his own life. It seemed more likely that he simply did not want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Furthermore, for several months following his initial confession, Olson had consistently maintained that he had entered the apartment alone, and that there was no one else with him. The sudden change in his story to shift blame onto his friend raised further doubts. The events discussed in this video took place in 2007 in the state of Kansas. And although 16 years have passed since then, this high-profile case has yet to come to a conclusion. On January 5, 2007, 19-year-old Jodie Sanderholm, who lived with her parents in Arkansas City, went to a dance rehearsal that was held at the college where she was attending. On that day, Jodie did not return home and stopped answering her phone. Such behavior was unusual for her, so her parents immediately became concerned and decided to file a missing persons report with the police. Jodie Leanne Sanderholm was born September 26, 1987 in Arkansas City to Brian and Cindy Sanderholm. She was the third child of her parents. She had a brother called Jason and a sister called Jennifer. From a young age, Jodie was fond of dancing. And although it played a large role in Jodie's life, she also did not neglect her studies. She was one of 4 valedictorians in her graduating class. While in high school, Jodie was a member of the National Honor Society, a Kansas State Scholar, a Kansas Board of Regents Scholar, and earned the Outstanding Physics Student of the Year award presented by David Steinmetz. She was a member of the Ark City High School dance team for 4 years. 2 of those 4 years, she was the captain. Jodie was a member instructor of Ark City Dance and a Universal Dance Association instructor. After high school, she attended Cowley College, where she studied pre-pharmacy. While at Cowley, she was a member of the Cowley Tigerette dance line. In 2007, the population of Arkansas City was about 12,000. Jodie's parents, like probably other locals, thought it was a good and relatively safe place to live and raise children. However, after Jodie disappeared and the details of what happened to her became known, many began to realize that safety was only an illusion and that the man was the most dangerous beast. On the morning of January 5, 2007, Jodie drove her car, a Dodge Stratus, to college for a dance rehearsal that was scheduled to end at 10:45. After the rehearsal, she intended to return home. Simbi called her daughter's cell phone several times, but she didn't answer, which was highly unusual. Jodie always kept in touch with her family, and even if she missed a call, she would call back soon. Cindy had a bad feeling about this. She decided to get off work and go home to see if Jodie was all right. When she arrived, she immediately noticed that her daughter's car was not in front of the house, and this only increased her anxiety because Cindy knew that by this time, Jodie should have been back from rehearsal. Upon entering the house and looking around, Cindy realized that Jodie had not returned home. Her dance uniform, which she put in the washing machine when she returned from rehearsal, was not there or in the hamper for her dirty clothes. The shower stall was dry, although Jodie always showered after dance class. It soon became clear that Jodie had no contact with her father or older sister, Jennifer, either. She had an appointment at noon, to which she never showed up. Cindy and Brian began calling their daughter's friends, hoping to find out where she might be. But after the morning rehearsal ended and Jodie left college, none of her friends saw her. That evening, the college dance team was scheduled to perform at a basketball game with a routine of which Jodie was the choreographer. She wouldn't have missed it of her own free will, but she didn't show up either. At about 6 p.m., still unable to learn anything and without waiting for their daughter to return home, Cindy and Brian contacted the police and reported her missing. Officers from the sheriff's office immediately put together flyers depicting and describing Jodie, began to inquire about her last known whereabouts, and put out an APB on the vehicle she was traveling in. The police learned from Cindy and Brian that Jodie had a boyfriend she had been dating since high school. His name was Colby Wilson. When contacted by phone, he reported that he had been at his brother's house in Texas for several days. The police quickly ruled him out as a potential suspect because his stay in another state was confirmed. The next day, January 6th, was very eventful. Lori Leglider, Jodie's best friend with whom they had been friends and danced since high school, provided the police with important information. They both enrolled at Cowley College, where they went on to study dance. Lori reported that she left work at Sirloin Stockade in Arkansas City around 10 p.m. Tuesday, January 2nd, and noticed a light blue car drive by the restaurant several times as she left. On her way home, she noticed a car following her in her rear view mirror. "I thought something strange was going on," Lori told the detectives. She decided to see if the car behind her was really following her, so she started turning onto different streets. The driver of the car behind her was doing the same thing, and it really scared Lori. She drove to the local police station and parked next to it, thinking that the stalker would leave her alone. She didn't see him after she stopped, so she drove home again. However, she had to go back to the parking lot near the police station because she saw the car chasing her again. Lori sat in the car for a while before driving home. She told the detectives that she didn't go to the station because she thought it was someone else's stupid prank. But that wasn't really all. On Friday, January 5th, The band Tigerette dance line was rehearsing at the college. According to Lori, she and Jodie got there around the same time and, as usual, parked not far from each other. Lori spotted the light blue car again. What's more, she recognized the man behind the wheel. It was a local resident, 23-year-old Justin Thurber. Lori did not know him personally, but had seen him several times in the company of his older brother and his friends. Lori and Jodie left practice at the same time and were supposed to meet up later, but Jodie never showed up for that meeting. Soon, several members of the dance team revealed that they too had seen Justin near the college during the past week. He always sat in his car in the parking lot and just watched. Within the first 24 hours of Jodie's disappearance, police had driven all over the city but could not find her car. Arkansas City is surrounded by fields and wooded areas. They brought in a fixed-wing aircraft to search the area from the air. The car was more difficult to hide than a person because of its size, so the police hoped to be able to see Jodie's car from the air. It was determined that the last time her cell phone signal was received, it was from a cell tower located near the Kaw Wildlife Area. This is a vast, wooded area along the Arkansas River. At this point in the investigation, only one person, Justin Eugene Thurber, who was identified by Lori Leglider and other members of the dance group, was considered as a person who might be involved in the disappearance of Jodie Sanderholm. It is important to note here that despite his young age, Thurber was well known to the police. 3 years earlier, in 2004, he had been charged with illegal possession of banned substances. He eventually received a suspended sentence and was released. 3 months after that, he was arrested for theft and probation violation. In October 2005, he was charged with disorderly conduct. 3 months later, he was arrested for petty theft and again found to be in possession of a controlled substance. On December 31, 2006, which was just 6 days before Jodie disappeared, Thurber was arrested again for theft. That same day, after paying a $3,000 bail, he was free. Having had a merry New Year's Eve, the next day, January 1st, he began impersonating a police officer and disrupting public order. When the real cops came for him, Thurber complained of chest pain and was taken to the hospital instead of the station. Why he was not arrested after his discharge from the hospital remains unclear, nor is it quite clear why he managed to get away with it all the time. A relative of his who works for the Cowley County Police may have contributed to this, but that's only a guess. That same day, January 6th, a police officer saw Thurber's car, a light blue Cadillac, parked outside his parents' house and decided to talk to him. His father invited the officer into the house. When the police officer asked Justin where he had been yesterday, he said he had driven his car to Winfield, a town about 13 miles outside of Arkansas City, in the morning. There, according to Justin, he met up with his friend and 2 of his friend's buddies, whom he did not personally know very well. Next, the 4 of them began driving around the countryside in a car belonging to one of his friend's buddies until the car got stuck on a dirt road near Cedar Vale. Then, as Thurber claimed, he walked toward Arkansas City, which is about 30 miles from Cedar Vale. After 6 hours, he got tired of walking and called his father to pick him up. Thurber's father confirmed what he said, saying he picked Justin up wet and dirty, a couple of miles from Cowley State Fishing Lake. Justin also told the police officer that his car, which he left in Winfield, had been returned by friends. The story wasn't very convincing, but there was nothing to charge Thurber with yet, so the officer left. That same evening, officers spoke with Alexis Swartzel, who recently ended a 3-year relationship with Thurber. She told officers Thurber often took her to the Kaw Wildlife Area, southeast of Arkansas City, and she pointed out places she and Thurber would visit. When the police informed Alexis that they were investigating the disappearance of Jodie Sanderholm, she was very surprised and said that Justin had once said that he had begun watching Jodie when he was 13 years old. He would peep at her when she was swimming in the pool in her backyard and sometimes in the evenings, peek through the window in her room, and wait for her to start changing clothes. Police asked Alexis about her reasons for breaking up with Thurber, to which she said she had broken up with him because he was too abusive and had strange tendencies that were becoming more and more frequent. On several occasions, she said, during intimacy, he would choke her unconscious. On top of that, he asked her to fight him because he could not get aroused any other way. It was becoming more and more obvious to the police by the minute that Justin Thurber might be involved in Jodie's disappearance. The police had no evidence to link him to the girl's disappearance. But late in the evening of January 6th, Thurber was arrested anyway. Detective Eric Mata arrested Thurber on bail revocation and suspicion of criminal trespass because the investigation into Jodie Sanderholm's disappearance revealed that Thurber was on the college campus where the detective believed Thurber should not be. Thurber told Mata that he wanted to talk to his lawyer. At the same time, police officers arrived at Justin's parents' house with a search warrant. The officers took the shoes Justin had been wearing the day before when his father picked him up. The shoes were wet and were drying on a towel. Thurber's father told police he helped his son clean the mud off the shoes. The clothes Justin was wearing when his father picked him up were also recovered, but by this time, he had had time to wash them. The next day, January 7th, searchers trained to identify human activity in rugged terrain set to work in the Kaw Wildlife Area. They found shoe prints that matched Justin Thurber's, as well as several other smaller shoe prints. As darkness fell, they decided to continue the search the next day. On the way home, some searchers drove past Cowley County State Fishing Lake and decided to stop because they heard Thurber was wet when his father picked him up. They discovered a muddy tire track, muddy shoe prints near a public restroom, mail addressed to Jodie Sanderholm's parents in a chemical toilet, dance shoes in another toilet, and a flip-flop sandal. Investigators later retrieved cut-off sweatshirts, a wallet containing Jodie Sanderholm's driver's license and social security card, her black leotard, a tigerette jacket with Jodie Sanderholm's first name on the front, a vehicle floor mat, and a car seat cushion. The sandal matched the impressions found at the Kaw Wildlife Area. Searchers spent the next 2 days around Cowley County State Fishing Lake in the Kaw Wildlife Area. On January 9th, specialists with sonar brought in to survey the bottom of the lake discovered Jodie's sunken car. On the same day, the hope of the Sanderholm family ulcer guide, Jodie's naked body was found under a pile of leaves, logs, and twigs at the Kaw Wildlife Area. Authorities found DNA evidence linking Justin Thurber to both Jodie's car and her body. The car had been in the lake for more than 3 days, so police feared that the water that filled the interior had destroyed all evidence. That was partly true. Forensics spent a great many hours before they found a short hair in the interior. Carrie Melton, director of the Forensic DNA Testing Lab, ran mitochondrial DNA tests on the hair found on the driver's seat of Jodie Sanderholm's car and concluded that it was almost certainly Justin Thurber's hair. Barbara Lale, an employee of a private DNA testing company, tested samples taken from Jodie Sanderholm's right biceps and right side of her chest. She concluded that Thurber could not have been excluded as a participant, although 99% of the population could have been excluded. Cell tower data showed that on the day Jodie disappeared, her phone and Justin Thurber's phone were in the same areas at the same time. Lori Leglighter, Jodie's best friend, said she saw Thurber in the college parking lot the day she disappeared. When the police looked at the camera footage provided by the college administration, they were convinced that Lori was telling the truth. Thurber was in the college parking lot at the same time rehearsal was going on, and he left that parking lot at the same time as Jodie. The tape showed that Thurber followed Jodie in his light blue Cadillac. Based on the fact that letters addressed to Jodie's parents were found near the lake, investigators speculated that Thurber had followed Jodie from the college to her home, and when she got out to retrieve the letters from the mailbox, he attacked her, pushed her into her own car, and drove her away. That theory was confirmed when a shoe print identical to the sole of Justin Thurber's sneakers was found next to the Sanderholm family mailbox. As previously mentioned, footprints of Thurber's shoes and smaller shoe impressions were found at the Kaw Wildlife Area. It was determined that these were the footprints of Jodie's shoes found at the fishing lake, along with her other belongings. Thurber's footprints and Jodie's footprints in the preserve were located side by side, walking along them. At one point, the searchers saw that Jodie's footprints were interrupted, and Justin's footprints went deep into the woods. This meant that he was carrying the girl further on his own. His shoe prints were also found where the body had been found. All 3 of the people Justin said he had been with the day of Jodie's disappearance denied what he said. They had not seen Thurber that day, which meant his story about the car being stuck near Cedarvale was a fabrication. The 3 officers drove Thurber to Cedarvale so he could show them where he said he was. Thurber was unable to determine where he said the car was stuck. Back at the police station, Thurber volunteered to take a polygraph test. He also requested that his relative, Chad Monroe, who worked for the Cowley County Sheriff's Office, be present during the questioning. The evidence found was sufficient to indict Justin Thurber. He himself denied guilt, and the judge set his bail at $1 million. Thurber's attorneys tried to convince the court that he was mentally retarded and incompetent, but were unable to do so. Thurber had graduated from high school and even attended college for some time, so the judge found the defense claim of his mental retardation unproven. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy testified at the trial. He said that the first time he looked at the body, he had no doubt that the last hours of Jodie's life were very painful. Her entire body and face were covered with bruises and abrasions. There were clear signs of strangulation on her neck. It was strangulation that was named as the cause of death of Jodie Sanderholm. I can't say all the information about what the medical examiner found during the autopsy. Not all horror movie maniacs are as brutal as Thurber was to Jodie. Without going into detail, and at the same time to give you some idea of what happened at the Caw Wildlife Area, I will say the following. The crime was motivated by carnal desire, and Thurber committed the crime with a stick. At trial, in addition to Thurber's ex-girlfriend, 6 other women testified, each claiming that the defendant stalked her. One of them was a co-worker of his. In one case, she even had to call the police to have an officer walk her to her car after work. It was already dark, and she was afraid to go to the parking lot because she saw Justin waiting for her. Earlier, he had left a rose and a note under the windshield wiper of her car saying he liked her and wanted to get to know her better. Several witnesses said they saw Jodie Sanderholm's car on January 5, 2007. Carrie Morris, a friend of Jodie's, noticed that Jodie was sitting in the passenger seat as their cars passed each other in Arkansas City shortly after noon. Morris reported that the man behind the wheel of Jodie's car appeared to be a large man. She called Jodie's cell phone, but received no answer. 2 other women reported seeing a vehicle that looked like Jodie Sanderholm's car while driving on a dirt road south of Arkansas City around 3 p.m. One of them said the driver was Thurber and identified him in court. On February 17, 2009, the jury reached a unanimous verdict, finding Thurber guilty on all accounts and recommending that he be sentenced to death. Realizing what sentence the judge would hand down, Thurber tried to negotiate a plea bargain. His lawyer told the prosecutor that Justin would plead guilty if he were not given the capital punishment. Jodie's family opposed such a deal. The presiding judge took the jury's decision into consideration and sentenced Thurber to death by lethal injection in March 2009. In 2008, the state of Kansas signed the Jodie Act, which, among other things, expands police authority over stalking suspects and expands the list of actions that can be considered stalking. Since the sentencing, Justin Thurber has not abandoned his attempts to appeal the court's decision. His attorneys are trying to prove that Thurber is mentally retarded. In 2018, the Kansas Supreme Court postponed Thurber's death sentence, citing a Supreme Court of the United States ruling that the execution of defendants, even those with mild developmental disabilities, is unconstitutional. The Sanderholm family said a competency hearing was held during the original trial, and Thurber was found to be fully competent at the time. Jodie's mother, Cindy Sanderholm, sat in the courtroom 11 years after her daughter's passing. She said that Thurber had written letters to other girls while in prison, and this should show that he was competent. That's sick. It's just sick, Cindy said. It tells you that he is competent enough to reach out to people and write letters. He knows what he is doing. I'm sure Jodie, pleaded for her life, and he didn't give it to her. She didn't get a second choice. She didn't get a second chance, she added. In August 2021, the Kansas Supreme Court issued an opinion announcing that a state law passed in 2020 allows Thurber, who is appealing a death sentence, to seek appointment by the Cowley County District Court of an attorney to assist in post-conviction DNA testing. Thus, even 16 years after Jodie Sanderholm's passing, the final word in this case has yet to be spoken. It should also be noted that no one has been executed since Kansas reinstated the death penalty in 1994. The The last time anyone was executed in Kansas was in 1965. Since then, besides Thurber, 9 other people have been sentenced to death, but no sentence has been carried out. We haven't executed anyone in that time frame, and there's no timetable to have any other future executions, said Adam Pfannenstiel, the communication spokesperson for Kansas Department of Corrections. I think it's a little shocking that Kansas reinstated the death penalty over 20 years ago, and there's not a plan yet, said Jennifer Aldrich, Jodie's older sister. I thought this would have been something that would have been discussed 20 years ago when it was reinstated. Therefore, even if Thurber's death sentence is upheld, there is a good chance that it will never be carried out. 39-year-old Justin Thurber remains at the maximum security El Dorado Correctional Facility in Butler County, Kansas. According to a Kansas Legislative Post-Audit Committee report published in 2014, each of the inmates serving time in administrative segregation at El Dorado comes with an annual cost of nearly $49,000. Further, it is not only the cost to house an inmate sentenced to death. Taxpayers also pay nearly 4 times the price to prosecute a case where the death penalty if pursued by the prosecution. $395,000 per case compared to only $100,000 per case when the death penalty is not sought. For the Sanderholms, taxes are added insult to an unbearable injury and a grueling wait for justice in the case of their daughter Jodie. It hurts me so bad every week when I see my paycheck, and I know I'm paying tax money to feed him, said Brian Sanderholm. Death is what he deserves, and that's what the law stated, said Cindy Sanderholm. So we need to get the law fixed so we can use it. If it was your daughter, your son, it was our daughter, what would you want to have happen? Asked Brian Sanderholm. Most regrettably, Cynthia and Sanderholm, Jodie's mother, passed away on December 2, 2022 at the age of 63. The Shelby von Halt case. Shelby Erin von Halt was a cheerful young girl born on September 7, 2000 in Fort Wayne, Indiana, USA. Shelby was the second child in a family that included her mother, Shauna Hartman, father Toda von Halt, older sister Peyton Hartman, and younger siblings, Davin von Halt and Isaac von Halt. Shelby graduated from Troy Center High School in 2018. Over the next 2 years, she worked at a steakhouse and other places while contemplating her desired career path. She seemed to be leaning towards a therapeutic field, although she hadn't yet decided the exact specialty. Living life like any other 20-year-old, Shelby's cheerful personality made her the life of every party. She was ever smiling, loved to dance, sing, and spend time with friends. Interestingly, Shelby was living independently, although the reasons or circumstances for this remain unclear. Although she wasn't particularly active on most social media platforms, her presence on Facebook was notable. She frequently posted cheerful photos, many of which included moments shared with her young niece, Camilla, the daughter of her older sister, Peyton. According to her mother, Shelby met another young woman named Valerie Rose Hardique on Facebook. Though Valerie, at 22, was slightly older, the two reportedly never had a close relationship. Little is known about Valerie's life, but it has been rumored that she had a troubled childhood, questionable associations, and potentially some mental health challenges. On June 20, 2021, at 6:48 p.m., a 911 dispatcher received a call from a distressed woman. She managed to convey that she was injured and said that Valerie shot her. Whether she provided her address or if the police traced the call is unclear. However, shortly after, officers from the Fort Wayne Police Department arrived at a residence where Shelby resided. Upon arriving at the scene, officers forced entry into the residence and found Shelby barely conscious, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds surrounded by a substantial pool of blood. While one officer stayed with Shelby, the rest performed what is termed a protective sweep of the residence to ensure no other victims were present and that the assailant or assailants were not still inside. As they awaited the arrival of an ambulance and local firefighters, the officers attempted to provide first aid. A surgeon asked Shelby if she knew who had shot her. She identified Valerie as the perpetrator of the attack. Soon after, emergency medical personnel took over Shelby's primary care, rushing her to the nearby hospital. She was conscious, in critical condition, but still alive. Meanwhile, Shelby's family was informed of the incident, and Fort Wayne Police Department officers began gathering potential evidence from her home. A significant piece of this evidence was a doorbell camera. After an immediate review of its footage, a person of interest was identified, though details were not publicly disclosed at the time. Public appeal was made, urging anyone with pertinent information related to the case to contact the police department or provide details anonymously through Crime Stoppers. In a twist of fate, the day after Shelby was critically injured, a disturbing incident occurred roughly 50 kilometers away in Ohio. Around 10:30 in the morning, the local police department received several calls about a suspicious-looking young woman loitering around a convenience store situated at a gas station. Eyewitnesses claimed she had been wandering inside the store and near the gas pumps for about an hour, appearing to try and glimpse the credit card numbers customers were using for their purchases. But that wasn't all. The police county had already received a call from a man who reported the same woman seen earlier at the convenience store. He claimed she had pointed a gun at his back. Shortly after, with precautions taken, police officers arrived at the gas station where the woman was still present, and they proceeded to apprehend her without any violent incidents. The woman was identified as 22-year-old Valerie Rose Hardique. She was in possession of a 9mm handgun, which according to reports matched the weapon used in the assault on Shelby. The name Valerie was the one uttered by Shelby when identifying her attacker. To further solidify the suspicions, Valerie's car was the same one captured by Shelby's doorbell camera, seen leaving the scene moments before the injured young woman's emergency call. Despite the ongoing investigation, Valerie was booked and transferred to the county correctional facility, awaiting her arraignment in the local municipal court. Meanwhile, Shelby was desperately clinging to life. 8 9mm bullet wounds had severely injured her chest and abdomen. Doctors had placed her in an induced coma, doing everything in their power to save her. Regrettably, 3 days after the brutal attack, on June 22, 2021, Shelby's body succumbed to the injuries, and she was declared dead. According to media reports, Shauna, Shelby's mother, mentioned her daughter passed away after undergoing 4 intricate abdominal surgeries that didn't produce the hoped-for outcomes. Shelby received 20 blood transfusions, and the medical prognosis was always grim. If she had survived, doctors believed that Shelby's legs would need to be amputated. One might wonder what could drive a 22-year-old woman to murder another young woman so viciously. Based on the limited details, the only motive the investigators disclosed was jealousy. It was alleged that Shelby was dating a young man to whom Valerie had a strong attachment, although his identity was never revealed. Valerie was charged with criminal assault and aggravated threats. Initially detained in Ohio, she was set a bail of $100,000 for threatening a man of the gas station with a firearm. After the initial legal proceedings in Ohio, Valerie was transferred to Allen County to face charges for the murder of Shelby. In a private ceremony, Shelby von Halt's remains were memorialized at a funeral home on June 29th, after which they were cremated. As the judicial process for the murder unfolded at the beginning of 2022, Valerie Rose Hardique entered a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to the murder of Shelby, citing a mental illness as a defense. As part of the agreement, the prosecution dropped an aggravating charge related to the use of a firearm during the commission of the crime, which could have added an additional 20 years to her sentence. Having pleaded guilty, the sentencing hearing was the only step left. This took place in September 2022 in the Superior Court of Allen County. As agreed, Valerie entered her plea as guilty but mentally ill. During the hearing, Valerie's defense attorney tried to present mitigating circumstances. He detailed Valerie's challenging upbringing marked by the death of her stepmother, abuse from a stepbrother, and a history of mental health issues. However, the prosecutors highlighted the trivial motive of jealousy that led Valerie to take Shelby's life. The prosecution also emphasized Valerie's criminal history, noting its escalation over time. They pointed out that when Valerie murdered Shelby, she was on probation, part of an alternative program due to previous charges. Throughout the hearing, Valerie displayed erratic behavior. At times, she appeared coherent and fully aware of the situation, while at other moments she seemed nervous, distracted, and even smiled at Shelby's family. Still, she answered the court's questions accurately. Media reports did not specify exactly what Valerie said when given the chance to speak, but they did highlight that she never showed remorse or apologized to Shelby's family. Shelby's parents clearly conveyed their profound loss during their victim impact statements. Shelby's father recalled his daughter's love for significant symbols like peace signs and mentioned that at the time of her murder, she was finding her way in life. He reflected on Valerie's demeanor during her guilty plea, stating that just by hearing her voice, one could sense her lack of remorse. The grief-stricken father asserted that by admitting to intentionally killing Shelby, Valerie wore her crime like a badge of honor, which showed clear evidence of her lack of regret. Additionally, Toby stated that while jealousy was presented as Valerie's motivation for killing Shelby, he believed there had to be more to the story that wasn't revealed. Referring to the defense's argument about Valerie's mental illness, Shelby's father pointed out that prisons are filled with people with mental issues. He vowed never to stop seeking answers as to why this tragedy occurred. In a heartfelt reflection, Toby emphasized that there were two tragedies in this case, the first being the shocking and agonizing death of his daughter, and the second being Valerie's choice to forsake her future out of rage. He pointed out that Valerie's children would suffer greatly. It was revealed that at 22, Valerie already had at least 2 children. Though no further details about them were made public, the grieving father expressed that the tragedy wouldn't end at the graveyard or in the courtroom, stating that true justice could never be found in such tragedy. However, he shared that he had forgiven Valerie to find peace within himself, feeling that his faith in Christ guided him to this decision. He expressed confidence that Shelby was with God and reiterated his deep love for her. Shauna, Shelby's mother, also shared her sentiments. She fondly remembered her daughter as a princess from the day she was born. She described Shelby as a kind spirit who wouldn't hesitate to help a friend. No matter the distance, Shauna committed to attending all possible appeal hearings that Valerie's defense might initiate in the future. Shauna shared the torment of the memory of her lifeless daughter and the helplessness she felt being unable to protect her. All she could do was lay her head on Shelby's chest as her daughter lay in a medically induced coma. She publicly acknowledged her daughter's courage, as Shelby had managed to name her assailant twice and fought valiantly for her life after being attacked. Shauna detailed Shelby's severe injuries, explaining that her heart was racing so fast that her body couldn't sustain it. Shauna mentioned she didn't seek compensation for her daughter's medical expenses, which amounted to nearly $500,000. As these were waived upon Shelby's death, funeral expenses were around $15,000. But Shauna expressed that she didn't believe she would ever receive compensation and didn't want any money from Valerie. Holding back tears, Shelby's mother expressed that memories were all she had left. She wished she could trade places with her daughter, noting that there were days when the grief was so intense that she couldn't bring herself to get up. After the presentations by the legal representatives and the victim's family statements, the court awaited the verdict from the judge. Given the plea agreement under Indiana law, the sentence could range between a minimum of 45 years to a maximum of 65 years, with the average being 55 years. Valerie's defense asked for the minimum sentence, highlighting various mitigating factors, while the prosecution sought the maximum. Before announcing his decision, the judge stated it was evident the murder was premeditated and Valerie was fully aware of her actions, which was further evident when she fled to Ohio. The judge acknowledged that Valerie might have had a challenging upbringing, facing inadequate education, personal traumas, and mental health issues. However, he emphasized her growing criminal record. At the time of Shelby's murder, Valerie was already facing pending charges for a separate crime. Given her past unsuccessful rehabilitation attempts and criminal background, her trauma couldn't be deemed a viable excuse. Reflecting on these points, the judge sentenced 23-year-old Valerie to the maximum possible sentence of 65 years in prison. He also ordered the destruction of the weapon used in the murder. According to the American Correctional System's records, Valerie is incarcerated in Indiana Women's Prison with the earliest estimated release date being June 18, 2070, at which time she will be 72 years old. After the court session, Shelby's parents expressed satisfaction with the verdict. However, in later statements, they clarified that no judgment could alleviate their pain. While Valerie would spend her days in prison, Shelby's mother emphasized that she would forever miss and remember her daughter. Interestingly, this case is one of the few where a mortal victim was able to identify her killer. Elaborating on this aspect, a prosecutor who was not involved in this case explained that when a dying victim identifies their attacker, such statements are known as dying declarations. These not only provide a starting point for detectives, but also stand as the sole exception to the hearsay rule in court trials, aiming to ensure the most reliable evidence is presented. He also stressed that such dying declarations are admissible in court since they tend to produce more trustworthy statements, due to the immense pressure and tragic circumstances surrounding them. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.